Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and I was a Dropbox freeloader for many, many years. Not only was I using a free account, I was also getting about 15 gigabytes of free storage from the company because I took advantage of their referral program for the better part of a decade. Every time I referred a friend over, I got another 250 megabytes of storage, and it really added up over time. Dropbox was a significant part of my workflow because all of the active projects that I was working on, I would save in a Dropbox synced folder. Those files that I was working on would get synced up with all of my other computers automatically, but also go off-site to the Dropbox cloud. So I was getting an off-site backup, file versioning, all sorts of great stuff, and I wasn't paying for it. How good is that? But Dropbox caught up with us freeloaders and said, hey, if you don't pay the subscription fee, we're going to limit your connected devices from unlimited amounts to only 3. And of course, that became a real problem for me. And I am just sick of adding subscriptions to my budget every month here. I've got too many things already, and I wanted to find some free alternatives. Now, many of you know I'm running with Synology network-attached storage devices here in the house. They have their own free utility as part of that hardware device that works a lot like Dropbox does, but I have to open up some ports on my router or use their relay or just connect up my VPN every time I was off-site to get files to sync up. And it just wasn't as seamless or as secure as my Dropbox connection was, and I wanted something that would kind of be another seamless alternative that didn't require me to open up a whole bunch of stuff on my router to the outside world. So I looked and looked and looked, and I found something here called Syncthing that I think is a really good alternative. This is an open source project. It's got a lot of support, it appears, out in the world, and it works on everything that I was using Dropbox on. And it works pretty much the same way. If I sync up a folder and I save a file on one computer, all of the other computers get that file. It works on my Synology NAS, so I have it running on that as well. That acts kind of like the server. But this is a completely peer-to-peer file sharing and syncing service. So every time one computer updates something, everything else connected on the chain gets it almost immediately. And the best part is it works off-site, and you don't have to open up any holes in your router. If you have UPnP disabled on your router like I do, it will work through relay servers, and it encrypts all of the data prior to sending it. So even if somebody is sniffing the network either locally or remotely, everything is encrypted before it is transmitted, and it would take a lot of resources, I think, to decrypt this traffic and see what kind of files you're transferring back and forth. And again, it's open source, totally free, so you don't have to worry about adding another thing to your monthly budget. Now, we're going to look at setting this up today, but if you want to get more specifics on the mechanics and the security model, check out Security Now episode 734, where Steve Gibson kind of dives into how all of this works and why he thinks it is a good solution to file syncing, especially if you want to get rid of a cloud service that you're paying for. There's some great show notes here that you can use for additional information, and this is something that Steve Gibson apparently is using himself to sync files up in between devices. So let's get into this now. We're going to set this up both here at my studio location, but we're also going to connect up to my shadow server in a cloud data center far away so we can look at how we can do some of this off-site syncing as well. So let's get the software installed, and then we'll go ahead and start syncing up some files. Now, if you're running on the Mac or PC, there are installable packages available in the download section of Syncthing.net. The Windows version is called Synctrezor. This will run in the system tray of your Windows computer. And then the Mac version here runs in the menu bar here at the top. And I'll show you both of those versions as we work our way through the video here. There are also, though, versions for other platforms, including Android. There is not an iOS version at the time I'm recording this video, so that's one limitation. But there are versions for most flavors of Linux. Now, if you have a network-attached storage device, head over to the Community Contributions page here, and I've got that linked in the video description, and you can find all these different versions depending on what you're running. The base configurations here are command line only, so if you wanted a more graphical approach, You can find those packages here in the community section. They have a Docker container available as well. And then on Synology, I followed the instructions here to get it installed on my Synology NAS. It was pretty easy to do, a few extra steps to get going with it, but by and large, it's a pretty easy installation. So let's go over to the Mac now and get things configured so that we can begin sharing files between this Mac here on my desk and a Windows cloud server located a few hundred miles away. So we're going to begin here on the Mac. We're going to click on Syncthing Mac OS, and that's going to bring us to this page. We're going to download this DMG file. This will save itself into our Downloads folder, but I'm on Chrome here, so I can just click on this down in the lower section of the browser. And now you'll see here we've got the Syncthing DMG mounted. We're going to just drag Syncthing into our Applications folder. And once that's done, you'll see it here in your Applications folder. You could, of course, move it down to your dock if you want. I'm just going to double click on this to open it up. We'll have that warning appear for the first time that we run it. And you'll see nothing popped up here, but it did actually show up here at the top. And this will take a second to get going, but to configure things, there's a few things you'll want to do. If you want this to boot up automatically every time you boot up your Mac, which might be the best way to go, you can click on Start at Login here, and that way it'll always load up. If the Syncthing software is not running, your files will not sync. So I think you'll probably want to leave that on, especially for a computer that you're using only occasionally. Once that software loads up, it'll start syncing and get all your files up to date. Now what I'm going to do here is click on the icon here at the top and go over to Open, because we have to start setting everything up. The first thing it's going to ask us is if we want to send anonymous usage reporting back to the developers. That's your choice. I'm just going to select No for now. It's also going to ask me about a username and password for the graphical user interface, and it's going to ask us to consider setting that up. Now, the reason why it's asking for a password is because there's a little mini web server that runs on your computer to configure and make things work on this device. Now, by default, the Syncthing graphical user interface through the web browser is only available on the computer in which the software is running, but you can configure it to allow remote administration. And if you do that, you definitely want to enable a password. But for now, we're going to just keep going. Now, you'll notice here that it already set up a default sync folder for us, which it put in my home directory with a sync folder there. But I'm going to set one up from scratch here just so you can see how all of this works. So right now we're in the Documents folder in my Mac OS 11 install. We're going to click on New Folder, and we're going to call this Sync Me. And we'll drop that right in there. And what I'm going to do now in the Syncthing interface is click on Add Folder. And you can see here we can give it a label. So I'm just going to call this Master Sync for the heck of it. And then we need to set a folder path. Now, it will default to your home directory, as you can see here. And then I'm going to go into my Documents, and it will kind of prompt you as you're working your way through. And you can see that it's found the Sync Me folder, which is what we're going to point it at. So we're going to click on that, and that will direct our share to that folder. Again, you can call it whatever you want. Every folder will be assigned a unique identifier, and this will be the same across all the devices that you set up in your sync chain there. If we click on sharing here right now, we don't have any devices to share it with, but we'll have more soon. You can also enable file versioning. I'm just going to enable simple file versioning at the moment, but I will step through some of the file versioning options that you have as we work our way through all of this. We're also going to set up ignore patterns in a little bit as well, but we're going to leave it blank for now just because I want to get this up and running quickly. And then we'll look at the advanced options here. You definitely want to make sure Watch for Changes is enabled because that is really important for making sure things get synced up properly. And I'm going to click Save here, and now you can see that we've got a master sync folder. Now it says unshared because we haven't yet connected any other devices. So let's go and hit up the Windows machine in the cloud and install Syncthing there and connect it to our computer located here. Okay, so now we're running Windows on our remote cloud computer, and we're going to go to the Sync Trezor utility, and then we'll scroll down here. You've got some options for what to install. Now, if you are on a relatively recent computer, you'll probably want the 64-bit version of the Trezor app. And they have a portable version which you can install on a thumb drive, or you can just install it directly on the computer, which is the option I'm going to choose here. So I'm going to click on Sync Trezor Setup x64exe here, and we'll go ahead and save that to our downloads folder. It's a pretty quick download, so it's probably already here. So I'll go into my downloads here, and I will find that Sync Trezor setup, and we'll execute that. You will get this warning about Windows protecting your PC because they don't have their publisher status here registered with Microsoft. So we're just going to click Run Anyway because I trust the source. And we'll let that setup process begin here. We'll just minimize things and wait for the setup screen to come up. We'll answer yes to this question here, and then we'll just go with the defaults for installation. And there we go. And this will just take a second to install. Now when this is done, I believe we will see the Sync Trezor app showing up in the taskbar here. So we're going to click Finish. And what should happen now, once things are finished, is that it should appear, there it is, down here. We're going to allow access to the firewall here so we can transit data back and forth. And we will answer no to this question. Now, the nice thing about the Syncthing interface is that it's identical across platforms. So if you're trying to walk through somebody on the phone as to how to set this up, they're going to be seeing the same thing that you see regardless of what platform they are on, which makes it a lot easier to help people through this process. Now, in order to connect this Windows machine to our Mac, we need to get the identifier here of the Windows machine. So I'm going to click on Actions here and go to Show ID. Now this identification number is unique to this installation of Syncthing. They say this is safe to transmit to people, so this is something you could email to somebody, for example, because there are some layers of authentication that have to happen before we allow files to be shared. One thing to note is that if you are making use of their discovery and relay servers, which I'll discuss a little bit more later, it's possible to get the IP address of your computer from this number. But beyond that, there's no real risk here in sharing this identifier over perhaps an insecure connection of some kind. What I'm going to do here, though, is just copy this into the clipboard and pretend like we're emailing it. And we're going to go over here to the Mac and connect up to that remote computer. Now to do that, we click on Add Remote Device. And you can see here there's an option for the device ID, which we are going to paste in. Now, if you have other Syncthing clients on your local network, those clients will appear here on the screen, which makes this process a lot quicker. So if you had a friend that you wanted to sync with, if they brought their laptop over to your house and connected to your Wi-Fi, you would see them on there and you can begin the chain locally, or you can paste in the identifier like we're going to do here. And I'm going to call this Remote Windows. We can call it whatever we want. And I'm going to click on Save. And what you'll see here now is the Remote Windows option showing up here on my list of remote devices. So to recap what we just did here, we got the identifier from the remote computer and we pasted it into our Syncthing installation here on the Mac. And now we've got it showing up here. Now you'll see here that it says disconnected. And the reason is that we have to approve the connection on the other side here. So let's go back to the Windows machine. And as you can see here, we got a notification telling me that this device wants to connect. Do you want to allow that? So this is where if somebody got a hold of your identifier, you would just click Ignore and the connection would not be made. But here we definitely want this connection because we want to share files back and forth. And I'm going to click on Add Device. And when I click Save here, this is going to now connect us back to that Mac so we can set up a syncing relationship here. So I'll click Save, and what will happen now is these two devices will likely find each other through the internet. Initially, it might show up here as disconnected, but eventually the connection will get made. Now this cloud server I'm using is behind a lot of firewalls, so we're definitely going through their relay servers to make all of this work. And as a result, the speed in which these connections are initially established might vary based on where you are. But it looks as though here we're now connected, and you'll see that the default name of my Mac here is a bit too long, so I'm going to click on Edit here, and we're just going to call this Remote Mac just to be a little more clear. And this doesn't impact anything. This is the name that I'm going to call this on the Windows machine, And as you can see now, we are connected up here and communicating. And if we go over to the Mac, you can see that it too shows itself as connected. But you'll notice here that it says connected and unused. And that's because although we've connected these two devices together, we haven't yet shared any files between them. So we're going to do that next. Now on the Mac, we already set up that folder for syncing here. Remember that? The folder we set up in the Sync Me directory inside of my documents. And what I need to do now on the Windows side is set up a folder in which I want those files to sync on this end. So I'm going to go over to the File Explorer here, and I think I'll do something similar to what I did on the Mac, which is create a Sync Me folder inside of the My Documents folder. So I'm just going to call this Sync Me, like we did before. So what I'm going to do now is tell the Mac to share its folder with the Windows computer. So let's jump back to the Mac here. And what we're going to do is go over to Edit under this Master Sync that we set up earlier. I'm going to go to Sharing, and you'll see now that we have Remote Windows showing up here as a destination, which I am going to click right now and click Save. So now we have that folder essentially being shared to the Remote Windows computer if we accept it. So I'm going to go back here to the Windows side here, and it says the Remote Mac wants to share the Master Sync folder. Do we want to add that? I'm going to say yes here. And now it's giving us some additional options. Now what I want to do is put these files into that folder that I just set up. So you could go with the default, but I like to put things where I know they're going to be. So to make this easier, I'm going to go over to the File Explorer and get the exact location of that folder. So we'll pull up the Explorer here. We'll go back into the Documents folder. We'll go to the Sync Me folder here, and if I go up into the address bar, I can just copy and paste this, C, Users, Junk, My Documents, Sync Me, over to the folder path here. Let me just zoom back out again so you can see what this looks like. And we'll just go ahead here and hit Control-V to paste it in. And now I'm going to click on Save. There's going to be more we're going to do with this share in a minute, but to keep things simple, just to start, let me click on Save here and get going. And now you're going to see that on the Windows side it says up to date. And if we go back to the Mac here, it also says up to date. Pretty cool. So now I'm going to create a simple text file on the Mac, and we're going to save that file in that shared directory and see if it makes its way over to the Windows server in the far away place in which it is located. So we're just going to say test file. This is a test. Put a couple exclamation points on there. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And again, what I'm going to do here is save this document in that Sync Me folder that we just created to share with that Windows device there. I'll leave it as a rich text document, I suppose, and click on Save. And of course, just like any other file on our computer that we save locally, we have that file here located in the folder. But if we now jump over to the Windows computer and look in its folder, you can see we've got the file there now as well, and I could add some text to it. So maybe I'll do that real quick and say adding more text from the Windows side. And we'll put an exclamation point there and then click on Save here. And that will update the file. So now what will happen here is it'll sync back from here to the Mac. And if we go back to the Mac and click on the file again, we should see that updating pretty shortly once they do complete the sync. And sometimes it syncs up pretty quickly, sometimes it's a little bit delayed, but there you go, you can see things have synced up. Now, just like other file syncing services, you could run into a collision where you have a file open on one computer and then you open it up on another one. Remember, we're syncing here and not sharing a single file. So in cases where it detects a conflict, it'll create a different version so you can go back in and review and then decide which file will be the most current one. That's something that Dropbox does and many other syncing services do. And that's why I would say that this is best used for your personal use or files where you know that you're not going to have that file open in more than one location at a time. Again, it'll do a pretty good job of managing this for you, but you definitely want to be careful about having files open in too many places simultaneously. Now, like Dropbox, you do have versioning available as an option. And what versioning means is that as you change files, a copy of the old file is saved. And there are some settings that you can adjust to fine-tune this if you want. So if you recall, as we were setting up this master sync folder, in the file versioning area, we had enabled simple file versioning. Right now it's set to keep 5 versions of the file. So what will happen here is that if we change a file, it'll save a version of it, and it'll keep the last 5 changes that were made to that file. Now these files will take up space on your local hard drive, but they'll be in a hidden folder. So when you delete a file, for example, it's still going to be there for a while because it's maintaining the versioning here. And this does save you, though, that if somebody were to remotely edit a file and they did something really nasty to it, you can go back and roll those changes back. And to do that, you click on Versions, and then you look for the file that you want to restore, and then you've got a range of dates here that you can restore it to. So for example, I can go back to the original version here and click on Restore. It's going to ask me if I really want to do that, and what it's going to do is move in an older version of that file and basically overwrite what we had before. So as you can see here, it has the original language of that file before we added text on the Windows side, and that's now been synced up to the Windows computer. Now it's important to note here is that versioning is specific to each client. So although I have versioning set up here on the Mac, if we go over to our Windows machine here and pull up our Syncthing thing, let's go ahead and open up our Syncthing settings, and we go over to that master sync folder and we go to Edit. You'll see here that file versioning on the Windows side is off. So I can't roll back on Windows at the moment, but I can on my Mac. Now if I enable versioning here, I can apply those same settings so it will keep versioning on the Windows side as well. And this is a big distinction from Dropbox because Dropbox has a central server that manages everything for you, and you can adjust versions on any client that you're operating on. But on Syncthing, you have to enable versioning on each computer, and you have the flexibility to have different versioning running on different machines if you want. But again, it's something you have to enable on a client-by-client basis. Now, like Dropbox, you can have Syncthing ignore certain types of files on a per-client basis. So for example, if I don't want to get QuickTime files synced up with my laptop on my directory, but I want another computer in the chain to get them, I can set that up on the laptop to ignore those files. Another thing that you might want to consider this feature for are some of the extra files that Macs and network-attached storage devices tend to drop into a directory. So for example, we are on my Windows computer right now, and I've got this DS store file here that just showed up after I copied the Syncthing disk image over to my shared directory. And this DS store file is something that Mac OS inserts as a hidden file on the Mac side to tell the operating system what exactly it should do with one of these types of files. But you don't want to see this all the time on Windows. So you can go in on a client-by-client basis and ignore those files. And let me show you what I have set up across all of my devices right now. This is on my Mac's file share on my desk. And here you can see that I'm ignoring the DS store files, and I'm also ignoring these files that my network-attached storage device creates in its directories, because these were popping up everywhere and really bugging me. So when you have this in your ignore pattern setting here, this will make sure that those files never sync up. And you do have options for wildcards. There's full documentation here. We're not going to get into the weeds on this one right now. But for example, if I wanted to ignore every .mov file, I could type in star.mov, and none of the QuickTime files will get synced up with my computer when I'm on the road. But these are specific to the client. And if you want to ignore these DS store files everywhere, you need to make sure that you have these exact settings on every single client. Now you saw how seamless it was to connect our Mac here on the desk with the remote Windows computer, and it was doing that through Syncthing's discovery and relay servers. These are run by volunteers that have made their computer resources available to Syncthing users. And what happens when you try to do a remote connection like we just did is that the client here will communicate with one of those volunteer discovery servers to figure out exactly where the other computer is located, and then it tries to set up a connection. If it's able to get a direct connection, great, those two machines will communicate with each other that way. If they can't communicate, then it goes through a relay server which is also run by Syncthing volunteers. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds as to how to set this stuff up yourself today, but you can set up your own discovery and your own relay servers, and the information about doing that is in the documentation. If you do get stuck through a relay, there will be a bit of a delay in getting files from one place to the other. It will probably run slower because it is going through some other parts of the network, but all of the data that you're sending out is encrypted before it's put out on the internet. And of course, you need to have that client on the other end with the right certificate to be able to get that data and know what to do with it. So it's pretty secure, but if you don't want to trust the Syncthing relay volunteers to do this for you, you can roll it yourself and get something going on your own if you so choose. There are also settings here, which I will pull up on screen right now. If you go into the actions and go to settings here, if you go to connections, you can enable and disable these things and then configure your own. So right now I've got everything on here. I've got NAT traversal, the global discovery, the local discovery, the relaying, and if I were to disable some of these things, I may not have as seamless an experience getting my files to sync up over the internet. But that option is available for you if you're very concerned about your security and want to make sure that your data flows in a specific way. You have that option, but if you want turnkey, it's enabled by default, and I found for an open source project that this is working exceptionally well, and I've been very happy with how effective my file syncing has been so far with Syncthing. So that's how I've been using Syncthing to keep my files synchronized now that Dropbox is kicking us freeloaders off the platform essentially. And I'm quite happy. I actually prefer this to Dropbox. It's working really well. I have 3 Macs, a Windows computer, and my NAS right now on a synced peer-to-peer thing going on, and everything's been seamless. I've been very, very happy with just how perfect it's been for my use case. Now, the one thing you can't do with Syncthing is something that you can do with Dropbox, which is making links publicly available. So if you ever had a large file to share, you would often just go into Dropbox and email a special link to somebody. Syncthing, as far as I know, doesn't do that. So in order to get that functionality, I'm using my Google Drive for sending large files. But really, I was using Dropbox only for my own personal file syncing, and for that purpose, it's been great. And I could, of course, maybe invite somebody into one of my folders to give them access to files too. There is a lot more to Syncthing, though. You can do one-way syncs and read-only stuff, so we can maybe look at those kinds of things in the future if you're interested. So let me know down in the comments below what you thought about this, what you'd like to see in addition to what I just did, and maybe we'll delve into this a little bit further with more detail in an upcoming video. But I think I wanted to start with the simple side of things first, get the basics going, replicate that Dropbox functionality, and we can go into the weeds from there. Again, let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Jim Peter, Tom Albrecht, Frank Lewandowski, Mark Bollinger, and Chris Allegretta. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.